Barron Trump filed a lawsuit to silence Jasmine Crockett, convinced the media and courts were on his side. But within seconds, a former aide revealed a secret plan that flipped the case on its head. The news hit hard. Barron Trump sues Jasmine Crockett for defamation. Headlines spread everywhere, social media exploded, and news outlets rushed into nonstop coverage. Podcasts, blogs, and commentators all jumped in, trading theories before the official complaint was even read. What made it bigger was who was involved: Barron Trump, the youngest of Donald Trump's children, now 19, usually quiet and out of the spotlight, suddenly stepping forward. This wasn't about politics or business, it was a full-blown federal lawsuit against Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, one of the boldest and most outspoken voices in Congress. The claim that she knowingly spread lies about Barron Trump during a televised panel just 3 weeks earlier. The timing was explosive. Trump Sr. was caught up in campaign chaos, while Crockett had just left a heated oversight hearing. The stage was already tense, and this lawsuit was the spark. Filed in a San Diego federal court, it accused Crockett of saying Barron had inherited the worst traits of his father and was secretly using the Trump name to pull strings. That last part suggesting backroom influences what his lawyers argued damaged his reputation beyond repair. Reactions split instantly. Trump supporters called it justice, while Crockett's backers saw it as intimidation. And Jasmine, she didn't back down. She walked out of her Fort Worth townhouse the very next morning unfazed. Coffee in hand, hair pulled back, Jasmine met reporters with a quick laugh. If they think this is going to scare me, they've clearly never watched a single committee hearing I've been in. She paused, looked straight into the camera, and added, "They picked the wrong one." But behind closed doors, her team felt the weight. This wasn't just media buzz, this meant depositions, discovery, cross-examinations, and full exposure. And exposure was something the Trump family had always known how to weaponize. Jasmine's lead attorney, Marsha Tillman, famous for her ruthless skill in high-profile defamation cases, warned her right away, they're not after money. They want reputational blood. They want to drag you through court and make you squirm on live TV. Jasmine's response was sharp, then I better make it worth watching. Still, the stakes were real. Within 48 hours, conservative outlets were already digging up old clips from her college debates and town halls. Clips of Jasmine, some real, some edited, flooded the airwaves, even private speeches recorded without her knowing. Every past mistake was suddenly front-page material. Amid the chaos, she sat in her father's modest living room outside Abilene. He looked at her gently. "You sure about this, baby girl?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked, "Why does it always take a fight to make people pay attention?" Her father gave a faint smile, "Because the truth doesn't move unless you push it." That was before the hearing, before the courthouse filled with cameras. Before one witness changed everything. The real story hadn't even started, but the atmosphere was already shifting. The footage at the center of it all wasn't blurry or doctored, it was crystal clear, pulled straight from a live political roundtable aired 3 weeks earlier. The topic: how political families shape public narratives. Four guests sat on that panel, but one instantly drew the spotlight: Jasmine Crockett. Strong voice, sharp tone, eyes that never looked away. She wasn't there to play nice. She wasn't there to sugarcoat. She was there to be honest. Midway through the debate, the host asked, "Do you believe members of the Trump family, especially the younger ones, still hold influence in today's politics despite not holding office?" Jasmine leaned forward without hesitation. "Absolutely, and not all of it is above board. People like to think Barron is just a quiet kid in the background, but that's not true. He's working through proxies, pushing narratives, and frankly, he's inherited the worst parts of his father's playbook." The room fell silent, not shocked, but paying close attention. The host pressed, "That's a strong claim. Do you have any examples?" Jasmine didn't flinch. "Let's talk about the cleanup media cycle that suddenly appeared to days after I challenged a Trump-appointed judge in a House hearing. Barron wasn't on camera, sure, but 3 sources tied to that media push connect directly to his personal network. Pretending he's not involved is just being naive. That one sentence about backdoor influences what fueled the lawsuit. The panel didn't erupt, no shouting, no walk-offs. It was just politics on TV, blunt, fast, and unfiltered. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine's words spread fast, especially among conservative influencers who accused her of going after a private citizen and using the Trump name for political points. But Jasmine didn't walk it back, she doubled down. 2 days after the broadcast, she tweeted, "Power without accountability is a threat to democracy if Barron Trump is playing political chess. Behind closed doors, then yes, I'm going to call it out, period." That tweet was later included in the lawsuit as proof of what they called malicious conduct. To those who knew her, though, it wasn't a scheme, it was frustration. She had watched political narratives shift again and again, fueled by anonymous leaks and coordinated campaigns, especially after tough hearings where she took a strong stand. Her chief of staff, Theo McMillan, noticed it too. One afternoon, he pulled her aside after a strategy meeting. "Have you seen it? Every time you speak out about judicial bias, the very next day there's a story painting you as unhinged." Jasmine gave a slow nod. Like clockwork, Theo sighed. "Feels like someone's got their hands on the Huiland, it's not random." So when Jasmine made those comments on live TV, it wasn't some offhand remark. It was months of pressure finally breaking through. Most people never saw the full exchange. The clip was chopped up, stripped of context, and reshared until it sounded more personal than political. Online threads painted Jasmine as reckless, jealous, even obsessed. None of it was true, but it spread like wildfire. One evening in her Fort Worth office, Jasmine rewatched the panel with her team. She paused and asked, "Did I say anything false?" Theo leaned back. "No, but you poked the nest." Jasmine took a slow sip of tea. Maybe the nest needed poking. What she didn't know, and what no one on her team could have guessed, was that someone on the inside had seen it all before, and this time, they had proof. Not whispers or speculation, but hard evidence, names, emails, memos, and a timeline that would later crack the case wide open. But before that storm, the Trump camp struck first and they made it loud. The lawsuit wasn't rushed, it was deliberate, strategic, timed to the hour. Filed in federal court on a quiet Tuesday morning, it came with a polished press release signed by Barron's attorney, Theodore Langham, a powerhouse lawyer from Newport Beach known for defending billionaires and cleaning up scandals for wealthy heirs. His statement read, "Ms. Crockett's comments were not only false, but calculated to damage Mr. Trump's reputation and safety. We will be pursuing every legal avenue to address this malicious behavior." Those words weren't accidental. By mid-afternoon, right-wing commentators were echoing the same. Lines calculated, injurious, reckless disregard repeated until they stuck. The message was airtight. They painted Barron as someone who had stayed out of politics, taken the high road, kept quiet until this supposed attack went too far. Inside a sleek media war room in Los Angeles, his team already had the playbook ready. Video clips were cut, commentators briefed, influencers handed talking points disguised as personal opinions. Every piece was designed to cast Barron as the victim of a smear campaign by a loud-mouthed lawmaker desperate for attention. Barron himself stayed off camera, but not out of reach. Sources close to the operation confirmed he was hands-on, approving content, signing off on legal wording, and demanding weekly updates. Still, when the press asked about his role, his lawyer stuck to the script. Mr. Trump is focused on protecting his privacy and integrity. Langham repeated that line almost word for word in every interview. But behind closed doors, things were far from calm. 3 days after the filing, Barron sat at a long glass table in Langham's private conference room, scrolling through screenshots on a tablet. "Why hasn't she responded yet?" he asked. "She's not scared, she's stalling," Langham, steady as ever, replied, "Because she's smart. She won't play her hand too early." Barron narrowed his eyes. "She better understand this isn't just about her words, it's about respect. My name is not going to be dragged by a woman with a Twitter account and a microphone." Langham stayed silent. He knew suing a sitting member of Congress was risky, especially one with Crockett's national presence. But risk wasn't what Barron cared about. He cared about control. What neither of them expected or maybe underestimated was Jasmine's refusal to flinch. No apology, no retraction, no carefully worded video. She let the story breathe, letting the Trump camp spin themselves while her team went to work. And her attorney, Marsha Tillman, had seen lawsuits like this before. A wealthy plaintiff, a shaky claim. Marsha Tillman had weathered media storms before, and she knew one thing: lawsuits this aggressive usually hid skeletons. Stay quiet long enough and someone always came forward. On a private call with Jasmine, she put it bluntly, "This isn't just about defamation. This feels like a warning shot." Jasmine didn't hesitate. "Then let's send one back." That's when Marsha made her move. She reached out to a former communications aide who had worked under both the Trump and Biden administrations, someone who knew how narratives were built and spread. Recently, he'd been pushed out of a major PR firm tied to Trump donors. His name wasn't public yet, but his message was crystal clear. "I've got documents, and I've got a reason to speak." No one realized it then, but those words would lead to 9 seconds that changed everything. Still, before that bombshell dropped, the courtroom would get its first glimpse of how calculated this feud really was. The first strategy session with Jasmine's legal team didn't happen in a law office or government building. It was tucked away in a rented conference room in downtown El Paso, quiet, off the radar, far from DC cameras and endless noise. By noon, the table was buried under files, laptops, and empty coffee cups. Jasmine sat back with her arms crossed, listening as her team worked through the details. Marsha Tillman clicked through a plain PowerPoint, no frills, just bullet points, case law, and key quotes. "They're framing you as emotional and undisciplined," she explained. "But their filing is thin, vague on purpose. That tells me they're relying on perception, not facts." Across the table, Theo flipped through a packet of social media threads. "Look at this," coordinated replies minutes apart. Half the accounts use the same line, reckless attack from a desperate Congresswoman. Jasmine studied the page in silence, then set it down. "So we've got a pattern," she said. "Now we just need proof of intent." That's when Marsha looked up, her voice steady but sharp. "We may have it." The room froze. Phones went silent, doors were shut. She opened her laptop and pulled up notes from her call with the unnamed former aide, the one who'd worked inside both camps. According to him, there were documents, emails, memos all connected to a narrative-building operation launched just days before the lawsuit. These weren't rumors or guesses, they were internal communications. Jasmine was skeptical. "Why would he help us?" Marsha shrugged. "He said he left on bad terms, said this one got too dirty, and he didn't like how fast they weaponized the media machine." Theo muttered, "Sounds like guilt." Jasmine added, "Or someone trying to wash their hands before worse comes out." Either way, they agreed to hear him out. A private Zoom call was arranged, no recordings, no screenshots, no names. The man's voice was steady, older, deliberate, no rambling, no drama, just facts. He described a file labeled Strategic Public Retaliation. Inside, Jasmine's name, media targets, talking points, even a list of headlines they wanted to ignite. It wasn't just Barron's team, it showed Barron himself had signed off. The memo was dated, verified. Theo leaned forward, sharp. "You're saying Barron Trump approved a smear plan against a sitting Congresswoman, then sued her for reacting to it?" The man didn't pause. "Yes, and I'll testify if I have to, but only if I'm protected." The room went still. Jasmine stayed quiet for nearly a minute, then finally said, "If he's telling the truth, this isn't just a lawsuit. This is coordinated manipulation." And I'm not staying silent. The decision was made. The very next day, Marcia filed a motion asking the court to allow a sealed, anonymous witness for the defense. The request shook the courtroom not just for what it meant, but for who it might involve. Journalists speculated, Trump allies scrambled, and within 24 hours the judge known for quick, no-nonsense rulings approved it. On the surface, Jasmine stayed calm. She attended hearings, spoke at town halls, and never once mentioned the lawsuit. But privately, she was bracing for battle. The night before the first hearing, she met Theo in a dim parking garage. "You sure about this?" he asked. She nodded. If they wanted silence, they should have picked someone else. They think the courtroom is their arena, but they're about to learn it's mine too. San Diego's federal courthouse didn't look like the center of a firestorm, glass and stone, like any other government building, but that morning, the sidewalks told a different story. Crowds packed shoulder to shoulder, news crews, photographers, protesters, supporters from both sides. Barron Trump was nowhere in sight. Barron's team claimed he was monitoring from a private location. Jasmine Crockett was not. At exactly 8 a.m., she walked through the courthouse doors in a charcoal gray suit, no jewelry, her expression unreadable. Cameras flashed, microphones stretched toward her. Someone shouted her name, but she didn't stop or wave. She walked straight in, head high. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. Reporters packed the gallery. On the plaintiff's side, Theodore Langham sat with 3 attorneys, each armed with tablets, binders, and color-coded tabs prepared for a marathon. On the defense side, Marcia Tillman sat beside Jasmine, calm and steady, with a junior associate on one side and Theo on the other. There more to keep Jasmine grounded than anything else. At 9:06 sharp, Judge Bernice Kaplan entered. A former prosecutor, known for being fast but fair, she scanned the room like someone used to handling people who thought they were above her authority. She didn't smile. The hearing began with opening statements. Langham went first. His voice was smooth, almost soothing. "Your Honor, the plaintiff, Mr. Trump, brings this suit not as a political statement, but as a citizen defending his name." Langham laid it out. The defendant, Congresswoman Crockett, falsely accused Mr. Trump of shadow influence and manipulation without evidence, and with full knowledge of the harm it would cause. He pointed to her TV remarks, her tweets, and even her office reposts, framing them as reckless and deliberate. Every word was crafted to paint Jasmine as dangerous, impulsive, and out of control. Then it was Marcia's turn. She rose without notes. "This case isn't about reputation, it's about power. My client answered a question honestly, based on credible information and a clear pattern of behavior. This lawsuit is an attempt to silence dissent and punish speech. And we will show the court that the plaintiff not only sought to discredit Congresswoman Crockett, but also launched a behind-the-scenes campaign against her long before this suit was filed." At that, Judge Kaplan raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. Witnesses followed. Trump's team began with a digital media expert who claimed Jasmine's comments had triggered a measurable spike in online threats against Barron. He presented charts, graphs, even heat maps of social activity on X. Marcia was precise. "Can you prove these threats came from my client's followers?" "No." "Can you confirm she encouraged any threats?" "No." "So what you're really saying is she spoke, and the internet did what the internet does?" The witness hesitated in a manner of speaking. Yes, it wasn't a win, but it wasn't a loss either. Next, Trump's team rolled out a behavioral analyst who tried to argue Jasmine's tone on the panel was provocative, emotionally charged, designed to incite. The testimony felt more like a TED Talk than expert evidence, and even Judge Kaplan looked irritated. Marcia objected twice, one of them sustained. Through it all, Jasmine sat silent, jotting notes. She wasn't the direct target yet, but every time her name was spoken, every clip replayed, every tweet projected, the room turned toward her. The pressure was building. Near the end of the day, Judge Kaplan called a recess. As attorneys regrouped, Theo's phone buzzed. He glanced down. read the message, then slid it to Marcia. She looked, blinked once, and leaned toward Jasmine. "He's in, he'll testify." Jasmine didn't flinch. She just drew one slow, deep breath. The surprise witness was official and he was coming the next morning with everything he had. By 8 a.m., the courthouse was buzzing. Not the usual chatter, this was different. Word had leaked overnight. Jasmine Crockett's team had added a new, sealed witness. Speculation exploded online. Some swore the witness was a former staffer. Others guessed a media insider. Nobody predicted the man who actually appeared. Judge Kaplan entered, brisk as ever. "Defense may proceed," she said. Marcia Tillman rose. "Your Honor, we call Mr. Garrett Wynn to the stand." The name rippled through the room, not famous, but in DC circles it mattered. Garrett Wynn, former strategic advisor, media operative, a man who'd quietly worked under both Trump and Biden, known inside the game, invisible outside it. He walked in wearing a navy suit, glasses low on his nose, the calm posture of someone who usually stayed behind the curtain. Sworn in, he folded his hands neatly in his lap. Marcia started slow. "Mr. Wynn, can you tell the court your most recent position?" "Until February, I was senior media consultant at Park Bridge Strategies, of special communications projects for both the Trump and Biden White Houses." Langham jumped up. "Objection, relevance." Judge Kaplan didn't blink. "Overruled, continue." Marcia nodded. "During your time at Park Bridge, were you made aware of a communications campaign targeting Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett?" "Yes." The air in the courtroom tightened. Reporters' pens froze mid-sentence. "And was Mr. Barron Trump involved in that campaign?" "Yes." A shuffle in the gallery, cameras zooming closer. "How was he involved?" Wynn leaned in slightly, his voice steady. "He signed off on a memo titled Strategic Public Retaliation, which included targeted messaging, selected media partners, and a list of priority subjects, Congresswoman Crockett among them." Langham shot up. "Your Honor, I object. The term retaliation is loaded and prejudicial." Judge Kaplan lifted a hand. "He's quoting the document. Sit down." Wynn didn't waver. The memo specified words to be used when referring to Ms. Crockett: unhinged, obsessed, disgraced. It mapped out release dates for press statements, coordinated tweets, and which friendly influencers would amplify them. Barron Trump reviewed and approved the final version. Marcia timed it perfectly. And how long before this lawsuit was filed was that memo approved? 3 weeks, 9 seconds. That's how long it took for the floor of the case to collapse. What had been painted as Trump reacting to defamation now looked like a trap and orchestrated ambush, signed and sealed weeks before Jasmine ever spoke on that panel. Langham scrambled. He pressed Wynn on motive, loyalty, money. "Are you testifying for political gain?" "No." "Were you promised compensation?" "Not $1. "Then why are you here?" Wynn's eyes locked on him. "Because there's a line. And I watched them step over it." Silence. Even the scribbling of reporters had stopped. Judge Kaplan recessed for lunch, but no one moved. The weight of those 9 seconds still hung in the room, seeping into every headline that would be written before the hour was over. Jasmine stayed seated, hands still, eyes on the front of the courtroom. Finally, she leaned toward Marcia and whispered. Judge Kaplan's eyes moved slowly across the page, her expression giving nothing away. The gallery leaned forward without meaning to. Reporters' pens hovered, suspended between note and silence. Finally, Kaplan looked up. "This court recognizes Exhibit 47. It will be entered into the record." The words landed like a gavel strike. Langham shifted in his chair, jaw tight, but he still didn't rise. To object now would only spotlight the damage. Marcia didn't press further. She simply returned to her seat, closing the folder with deliberate calm, as if to say, "We don't need to add anything. The paper speaks louder than we ever could." On the defense table, Jasmine sat unmoving, her eyes fixed not on the judge, not on Langham, but on the exhibit sticker now glowing under courtroom lights. The trap they had set for her was now evidence against them. Kaplan leaned back, tapping her glasses once against the bench. "Mr. Langham, the court will hear from your side when ready." But the silence that followed wasn't readiness, it was recognition. Everyone in that room knew what had just shifted. The lawsuit had started as a weapon. Now it looked like a confession, but because of principle. The leak had reframed her not as an aggressor, but as a target who refused to fold. Theo watched her scroll, the glow of the screen lighting her face. "They're rallying," he said quietly. "You just became bigger than this case." Jasmine didn't smile. She let the wave of headlines and hashtags pass in silence, her thumb hovering over the phone like she wasn't sure whether to keep reading or throw it away. Finally, she handed it back. "Momentum isn't victory," she said. "Tomorrow, they'll come twice as hard." Theo nodded, but his expression carried something. Else a trace of awe. For months, he'd seen her prepare for this fight. Tonight, he was seeing her carry it. Above them, in the city they both served, every newsroom was rewriting tomorrow's front page. The phrase "strategic public retaliation" would sit in bold print, next to her name, next to Barron Trump's, and no matter what the court ruled in the weeks ahead, that pairing could never be erased. The SUV pulled out of the garage into the August night. Sirens wailed blocks away, flashes of red and blue cutting across the windshield, as if the whole city already knew the trial had changed, was already written. Judge Kaplan called the court to order at 9 a.m. sharp, but even she couldn't pretend the world outside hadn't changed. Cameras clicked in rhythm, reporters scribbled, and the low murmur of the gallery felt more like an audience waiting for the second act of a play. Langham rose first, his voice tighter than usual. "Your Honor, in light of yesterday's testimony, we reiterate our position that this lawsuit concerns defamation and personal harm, not political theater." But the words fell flat. No one in the room missed the irony. It was Langham's own client who had been exposed as the one orchestrating theater all along. Marcia didn't rise right away. She let the silence stretch until the weight of it pressed against the wood-paneled walls. Then calmly, "Your Honor, we intend to show that this lawsuit is not just meritless, it is malicious. And the document entered into evidence yesterday proves it was never about justice. It was a weapon. My client was the target. The court deserves to see the full design of that weapon." Jasmine sat still at the defense table, hands folded, eyes fixed on the bench. For months, she had been painted as reckless, dangerous, unhinged. Now, she was steady as stone, while the other side scrambled to explain a paper trail with her name typed cleanly at the top. Outside, chants carried through the courthouse windows. "Truth ain't defamation, power fears accountability." The sound bled into the proceedings, uncheckable as the evidence itself. And for the first time since the trial began, it wasn't Jasmine who looked on trial. By the time court resumed the next day, the mood had flipped. The tension was gone, replaced by damage control. Langham's team no longer looked like confident attorneys. They looked like consultants scrambling to contain a crisis. Their pace slowed, their voices dropped, and their eyes stayed glued to their phones. And Barron Trump, still absent, no appearances, no statements, no photos. Whispers spread he'd fired advisors, flown back to Florida, even clashed with his father. Nothing was confirmed, but the silence only deepened the cracks. Judge Kaplan reminded both sides that the trial was still active and warned against theatrics. But it didn't matter. The damage had already spilled far beyond the courtroom. Marcia rose, calm but firm. "Your Honor, in light of yesterday's testimony, we ask this case be dismissed on grounds of malicious prosecution. We also request an inquiry into the abuse of the judicial system for political retaliation." Langham didn't even bother to stand. Into the microphone, he muttered, "We object to that characterization and reserve response until our review is complete." It was a stall and a weak one. Everyone in the room could feel it. Their case was running on fumes. What began as a bold strike was now just paper and delay. By midday, the headlines had already landed. Trump lawsuit collapses in court. Memo shows Barron Trump approved smear campaign. Jasmine Crockett turns defense into national moment. And outside, the courthouse was no longer quiet, it was chaos. People who had never followed a court case were now glued to live stream: students, retirees, office workers on their breaks. Online debates raged, quotes circulated, and the leaked memo was downloaded, dissected, and even annotated like homework. In a Sacramento bar, two men in their 40s watched the coverage. They tried to use the system to punish a woman for saying what everyone else was already thinking. One said, his friend nodded, and she burned them with receipts. Even conservative outlets began treading lightly. Some shifted entirely, suggesting the lawsuit had been rushed or poorly advised. One headline asked, "Did Barron get bad legal advice?" No spin could clean it up, not convincingly. Meanwhile, Jasmine refused to celebrate. She went back to her job, meeting with constituents in Lubbock 2 days later. She never raised the case herself, and when asked, her answer was always the same. It wasn't about winning, it was about telling the truth and refusing to fold. But her restraint didn't quiet others. 6 House members issued a joint statement condemning lawsuits as weapons against elected officials doing their jobs. Civil rights lawyers praised the case as a warning to powerful figures who think legal threats can silence critics. On campuses, professors pointed to Crockett as a case study proof of how defamation law could be twisted and how one honest witness could reset the balance. As for Garrett Wynn, he disappeared after his testimony. No interviews, no spotlight. Still, his name lingered trending for 2 straight days. Some called Garrett Wynn a hero. Others questioned his motives, but nobody denied the impact. One journalist summed it up: he walked in quiet, walked out historic. In DC, political circles took notice. Few said it out loud, but the shift was undeniable. Jasmine Crockett was no longer a rising voice. She was a force no one could afford to underestimate. And while the courtroom drama had ended in public, the real fallout began in private. The consequences that linger long after headlines fade were already taking shape behind locked doors, whispered in corridors. Barron Trump slipped back to Palm Beach under the radar. No press pull, no cameras. His plane touched down late in the day, and according to one local reporter, the only person waiting was his mother. At Mar-a-Lago, staff were instructed not to discuss the trial. Some were shuffled into new roles, a few were quietly dismissed. Barron kept silent, no statements, no appearances, barely speaking at all inside the house. 2 days later, he sat across from his father on a patio lined with gold-trimmed chairs and crystal ashtrays. The tension wasn't loud, it was heavy, pressing between them like humid air. "You should have kept it quiet," Donald muttered, lighting a cigar. Tapping ash toward the railing. Barron didn't look at him, just stared out across the manicured lawn. "You gave her the spotlight," his father pressed. "You had the upper hand and you gave it away." Barron's reply was low, almost flat. "I just wanted her to shut up." Donald raised an eyebrow, smoke curling in the air. "That's not how the game works. You go after a politician, you'd better be sure they don't have ammo." The silence that followed wasn't disappointment, it was frustration. Not over losing a case, but over losing control of the story. For a family that had dominated the media for decades, this was different. This was personal. Meanwhile, Jasmine's battle wasn't political, it was emotional. One night, she sat in the back of her father's pickup, the bed lined with old blankets and 2 folding chairs. The West Texas sky stretched wide above them, crickets chirping, the distant hum of tires on country roads filling the quiet. Her father handed her a soda. "How are you holding up?" She took a slow sip, then shrugged. "I don't feel like I won. I just feel tired." He nodded. "Truth'll do that. It doesn't shout, it just weighs on you." She let the words settle before speaking. "I wanted people to see what happens behind closed doors, the way money and power get. I used to crush anyone who pushes back. And now they do," he said softly, "because you didn't fold." He was right, she hadn't, but it had cost her. Friends called nonstop, old colleagues wanted interviews. A network offered her a primetime special. She turned them all down. For the first time in weeks, she just wanted quiet. Theo, on the other hand, never slowed down. He was already piecing together a digital archive of the case, every filing, every headline, every line of that memo ready for whatever came next. Maybe it was for teaching, maybe something bigger Theo never said. But in one late meeting, he leaned toward her. What if this isn't the end? What if this was just the warning shot? Jasmine exhaled. Then we'll be ready. Same way we were this time. She sounded steady, but beneath it was something heavier. Sadness, not for herself, but for the world she was standing in. People shouldn't have to be brave just to tell the truth, she said one afternoon. But somehow that's the price now. Theo only nodded. And for a moment, they sat in the quiet. In her private thoughts, Jasmine often drifted to Garrett when, what finally pushed him to speak? What did he gamble by stepping forward? She never got to thank him. The lawyers had kept them apart to avoid claims of collusion. But she hoped he knew his 9 seconds hadn't just shifted a trial. They'd torn back the curtain, exposed the machinery behind them. Smiles, the polite statements the machine built to crush reputations and call it civility. And yet, the story wasn't over. It had grown bigger than her. Bigger than Barron. It had become a question for the whole country. When power swings without truth, who do we stand with? 2 weeks after the case was thrown out, Jasmine stood in a high school gym in Las Cruces, New Mexico. The bleachers were full of teenagers who'd invited her not as a politician, not as a headline, but as someone who'd walked through fire and lived. She leaned against the podium, no notes, no script. You don't have to be perfect to stand your ground, she told them. You just have to know why you're standing. The gym went still, no scrolling, no whispers. Just wide eyes locked in. One student raised a hand. Were you scared? Jasmine paused. Then answered honestly, yes, but not for me. For what it means when people with money and power think they can decide what's true just by suing someone. That gym wasn't Congress, it wasn't a TV spotlight, but it mattered. The story had left the courtroom and settled into living rooms, classrooms, barbershops, and group chats. And it stayed there. The court of law had ruled in her favor. But the court of public opinion went further. It turned the case into both a warning and a mirror showing how fragile speech could be, how quickly truth could be punished if people weren't ready for the blowback. In the weeks that followed, 3 other public figures spoke up, not with lawsuits, but with stories. Stories of quiet threats, coordinated media attacks, whisper campaigns funded by deep pockets. And then Garrett resurfaced, not on TV, not on a podcast, in print. An op-ed for The Atlantic titled "Truth Costs More Than Silence." He didn't write about the trial. He wrote about the fear, about the machine, and about why he finally stepped outside of it. The memo he'd revealed was now public record, archived, studied. Law schools even began using Crockett v. Trump as a case study in political lawfare. How lawsuits can be filed not to win, but to wear people down. As for Barron, he faded slowly, deliberately. No press, no photo ops, just absence. His team put out a short statement. They were moving on, focusing on positive engagements. But people remembered. They always do, not because of who he was, but because of what he tried to do and how it failed. Inside Jasmine's office, life went on. Bills to read, hearings to prepare for, communities to serve, but something had shifted. Constituents who once stayed in the back now came forward to shake her hand. A mother in Amarillo sent her a handwritten letter. Thank you for standing up when most of us feel too small to speak. Jasmine kept that letter in her briefcase, not because it made her proud, but because it reminded her of the stakes. One night, Theo walked into her office while she was still working. He dropped a folder on her desk. "What's this?" she asked. "Your next speaking request. Georgetown wants you to guest lecture next month." She raised an eyebrow. "Me? Teach?" Theo smirked. "Seems they finally realized you've got something worth saying." She smiled, tired but full. Let's hope they're ready to hear it. And that was the truth. It was never just about winning a lawsuit. It was about what comes after. What people remember, what people carry forward. This case revealed something deeper. Truth doesn't always speak louder than money. But if even one person protects it even for a moment, it can last long enough to be heard. So the next time someone with power tries to silence a voice with a lawsuit, they may think twice. Not out of fear, but because that strategy doesn't work the way it used to. People are paying attention now. And maybe that's the real change. If you believe truth matters, even when it's messy, even when it's hard, you'll recognize that this story isn't the last. But as long as someone's listening, it won't be ignored.